The village of we find that Jesus and his disciples were in the village of was in Samaria, and they were rejected there. And James and John took offense to it so much so they wanted to call down fire upon the Samaritans. Then we go into chapter 11, and next thing you know, Jesus is talking about the Good Samaritan. And as you said,
the Good Samaritan is in chapter 10.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to get my chapters mixed up.
Okay.
So in chapter 9,
right, chapter 9, verse 51.
Say again?
Chapter 9, verse 51.
Yeah, through 55. You, you find that Jesus is in Samaria, and
right.
that he's rejected there. And James and John wants to call down fire upon the Samaritans.
Okay, right.
Then we move on to chapter 10, and next thing you know, Jesus is talking about the Good Samaritan. In some ways, that had to be an object lesson to his disciples about this character we're seeing in the Samaritan in the illustration that he's given. Because again, his disciples, at least two of them, wanted to call on fire on that village.
I think that's an excellent observation. In chapter 10, you also have geographically reference to Age to Chorazin and to Bethsaida and to Capernaum, Tyre and Sidon, and all these other geographic locations, but their involvement in Samaria and the way they were treated, Jesus using the Samaritan here could have been an implicit lesson to the apostles, especially to James and John. That's an excellent point. I've never put those two together. Thank you for helping us there. Do you have any other suggestions along that
line? Dan, your graces and your praise. Thank you.
Okay. Well, no, thank you very much for putting those two together for us. That's very helpful. Anybody else online that has a question or something you would like to add? Nobody else? Okay. Anybody here like to have a question or something you would like to add to what we've seen already?
Well, when the Samaritans were looked down on.
Yes, ma'am.
They were considered mixed breeds. And when Peter was instructed to take the word, that feet was let down and said, "Why is Peter killing me? Lord, I've never eaten anything unclean." He says, "Call you not unclean what I have clean."
Yes, right. In the New Testament times, there are no Samaritans, Jews, Gentiles. Everybody can be one in Christ. That's what God is striving for certain. Okay, the quote of the statement of the night came from William. We were talking about the service, and I asked him, "So why did you retire?" He said it 30 years. Says, "Why did you retire?" And I quote, "I got old." Right there. Let's look at the scenes that make up the story of the Good Samaritan, the story itself. For our study, we will suggest that there are actually 3 scenes. So let's try to summarize them in a few words. Scene number 1 would be the self-living, and that would be the thieves who
I can't hear anything.
Cowards, they're prudent.
Prudent, okay. Oh, I'm teasing, of course. But their theory was, their philosophy was, what is yours is mine. They were self-living. You come to scene number 2. This one is disturbing to us. They were self-bidding, and that would be the priest and the Levite. Now, in Old Testament times, what did a priest do?
He interceded with God.
Sir?
He offered sacrifices and
Did it offer sacrifices for people
and
to God?
basically interceding with God.
Hebrews chapter 5, I think it is, verses 1 and 2. They offered sacrifices in things pertaining to God. They helped their fellow Jews in their relationship with God. They were mediators. That's a key word. They mediated between Jews and God by the ones performing the sacrifices. Who are the Levites? By the way, that's Hebrews 5, verse 1. Who were the Levites? What did Levites do?
Served in the temple.
Service.
Beg pardon?
They serviced. They were ones that provided service in carrying the tents or carrying the.
Certain branch of the Levites did that. The Kohites.
The priest came from the Levites.
Ma'am?
The priest came from the Levites.
The priest came from the tribe of Levi, as did the Levites. The Levites were given the specific responsibility of helping the priests. And so they were facilitators. You had the mediators and you had the facilitators helping the mediators, the priests and the Levites. They were very important people in the Jewish economy. To learn what the Levites did, you turn to Numbers chapter 8, verse 19. So in Jesus telling the story, he took individuals that were responsible for helping people in their relationship with God. Priests, Levites. Now, let's see in the story as it's told what the priest and the Levite did. We know the robbers took everything the man had and left him half dead. Here comes the priest, verse 31, going down that road when he saw, okay, Katrina, he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Anti-para-erkomai. You say, what in the world is that? What disease is that? It's actually the verb that's translated pass by on the other side. And it's 3 words put together to give the idea of going alongside, opposite to. And so I might best illustrate it this way. He sees this man, and he, alongside, opposite to where that man is, goes his way. He wants nothing to do with what he saw. Question, why did he do that?
Brother Winkler.
Yes.
Did not the priests, were they not to have anything to do with dead bodies? And remember, he saw a body, and I guess he may have thought it was dead, and he decided to pass on the other side.
Excellent point. Excellent point. You are correct.
He didn't want to
But
defile himself.
how is the man going to know, the priest going to know that the man is dead?
Oh, yeah, I don't know how he would know that, but if if he saw a body that appears to be motionless on the other side. And you and I both know that road, Jerusalem road, was a dangerous road.
Yes, sir.
And it may not have been unusual to see a body kind of laying over there because he obviously was not asleep. Maybe he thought he was dead. And again, that's not a good excuse, but nonetheless, the priest he saw a body and he decided, I'm not going to have anything to do with it.
Okay, all right, that's one idea. Somebody else?
Fear,
Ma'am?
fear.
Fear, he was afraid, okay? Afraid that the robbers may still be around. Okay,
No compassion.
Yeah,
okay, hold that one. Yes, ma'am?
that's what I think the robbers might still be around.
Okay, robbers might still be around.
Looking out for number one.
Anybody have another idea? Yes, ma'am?
He might have thought he deserved it.
I'd have thought he deserved it. Wow. Kind of callous. You know preachers like that, don't you? No, you don't. No, you don't. There's one reason. You say, we don't know why. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. He didn't care. Because he is placed in the story in direct converse to somebody who did. And so, we can conjecture he may have thought that the man was dead, and that's an excellent conjecture. I don't want to disparage that at all, but it's just that conjecture. We can come up with all these ideas, and they're nothing but ideas that float into the realm, into the arena of the inconsequential. There's one reason why, in the story, the man didn't stop. He didn't care.
He didn't have compassion.
Didn't have compassion. Now, pause before we go any further. How religious are you? Are you concerned about your relationship with God?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to help other people in their relationship with God? That's what being a priest was all about. And are not we as Christians called a royal priesthood in 1 Peter 2, verse 9? So how religious are you? Next question is, how much do you care? Or do we pass by on the other side? So the Levite, it tells us that this Levite, likewise, verse 32, when he came to the place, saw him, he did the same thing. He saw the man. Passed by on the other side. Same word. The Levite did exactly what the priest did. The Levite was somebody that helped the priests in helping people in their relationship with God. Levites were movers and shakers. So let me ask you, take me pause. How busy are you in the kingdom? You make sure that the count's up on the board, if that's or it's still there. You make sure that the juice is in the cups for Sunday morning. Are you here whenever there's a work day outside to make sure that the place is all spruced up? We're going to have a campaign. Do you go to Costa Rica? How busy are you in the kingdom? Next question. How much do you really care? You can be as busy as you want to be, but if you don't care, God doesn't care. How much do you really care? So why didn't the Levite stop? Jesus doesn't fill in that, make that connection. He's not wanting to fill in that.
That's not my job.
That's not my job, okay? Jesus told us what he wanted to tell us in this story about a priest and a Levite to make his point. Neither of them stopped. Regardless, because they didn't care enough to
And consider the audience that Jesus had. They would have the Pharisees, they would have respect for priests and Levites. So
They would have.
therefore you consider the audience why he brought up priests and Levites, because they knew what priests
They
and
would have
Levites
made connections with those two priests and Levites more than with a Samaritan. Right? So come to scene number 3. And scene number 3 would be the self-giving. This man saw, passed by. This man saw and passed by. What about the Samaritan? But a Samaritan, verse 33, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw, he did the same thing. By the way, Katrina, you referenced that a minute ago, and it's a very good observation. We need to see and we need to hear people who are marginalized. The word for saw here is a word that means to see from experience, not see with the eyes, but see from experience, see and recognize. And so this man saw and he recognized in the story a man in need. Pause for a moment. When I see the marginalized, what do I see? What do I see? What I see largely will determine what I do. What do I see? What do I see? He saw him and had compassion. Okay, the word compassion is in root form splagizomai. That means absolutely nothing. I just like to say splagizomai. Isn't that deep sounding? Yeah. It actually means to be moved in your bowels in a different way than we mean it today. Because in Bible times, they felt like the deeply seated emotions of man rested in their lower extremities. So to be moved in your bowels was to be moved with emotions of kindness and gentleness and wanting to help. That's the word for compassion. It translates, Dave.
Is the word saw in reference to the priest and the Levites, is that the same meaning?
I think it is. I would have to check it. I didn't bring my phone, but we could see if Daniel, do you have can you bring the Greek Testament up? Is Saul there, Ido, or Ra'o for the priest and the Levite as well?
So there's a bunch of Saul. So in 32, to replace and Saul, that's Adon.
Okay, that would be a form of Ra'o to see with experience.
And in 33, as a journey came with us and saw him, that's also
okay.
Adon.
Okay, so it would be all three the same word. Thank you for asking that. So the priest and the Levites saw, and they, from experience, they knew what they were looking at. But they passed by on the other side. Boy, that makes them even greater scoundrels, doesn't it? Yes, ma'am.
Is it, if the meaning is see from experience, then do they have different experiences? And if when I think if I see something from experience, then it's something that I really do know something about, right? Something that if I see someone hungry, from my experience, I know what that feels like to be hungry.
We don't know the depth of what the experience was.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we're talking about a priest and a Levite. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it, but I'm just saying that if it's the same meaning of word, then
I guess maybe instead of experience, maybe I could use the word they saw and they recognized what they were looking at. That would be a better way. You see the same word or concept when you get to the parable of the prodigal son. Probably do that one in the morning. But the father had compassion, and he saw the boy from a long way off, and it's the same word. And so the daddy recognized, he saw from experience the gait of the boy or whatever, the girth of the boy or whatever. He saw this and he recognized it. And so what Jesus is saying is the priest, he came to this man, he recognized what he was looking at. He passed on to the side. Same thing with the Levite. So the Samaritan comes and he recognizes what he's looking at. But instead of not caring, he has compassion. Now, Dave, the word compassion here is a passive verb. What does that suggest?
It suggests that it was something that was given to him.
Something done to him rather than something he chose to do. So this man, he doesn't come up on the guy that's fallen among thieves, the Samaritan. He doesn't come up to this man and say, "Oh, I need to do something." That is not what the picture Jesus painted. Being a passive verb, it means he was overtaken by compassion. Something was done to him. So this man, the Samaritan, the way Jesus told the story of the verbiage that he used, has the Samaritan coming and he recognizes what he sees, and it just literally overtakes him with feelings of emotion. And it's because he's been overtaken with feelings of emotion, boom, his compassion responds with action.
Dan, didn't you say that they should have all been familiar, like you said, that road from Jerusalem to Jericho was a dangerous road. So that could be a lot of that. When we talk about experience, they maybe never got robbed there, but they knew about that road.
They recognized what, yes.
that happened on that kind of thing happened on them.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So, do you know why we see and don't act? Do you know why we see and don't care? Because we don't really see. We're not totally overtaken by the plight of those in need. That's what we need to see. That's what we need to see.
There's a saying, people don't care how much you know until how much you care.
Right. Very true.
They're seeing, but not yielding to this person as important or more important than me. It's a person that Christ came to for. It's a person made in the image of our Creator in need. So they can see it and recognize it. They didn't respond. And I love what you said about what I see is going to determine what I will do. Because the beginning of the parable starts with the question of who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, who was the neighbor? It was someone who did.
Exactly.
So, are we overtaken by what we see? Do we see the point? Daniel and I were talking at the break. We went to Luke chapter 4 in our thoughts, where Jesus goes to his hometown, Nazareth, goes to his home church, the synagogue there, picks up the robe. He's given the scroll of Isaiah, and he reads a passage in Isaiah that says he's been anointed with the Holy Spirit, and he's been anointed to go about and preach good news to the poor. He references the poor and the brokenhearted. Depending on what translation you use, the poor, the brokenhearted, the blind, the oppressed, the captive. rolled up the scroll, gave it back, and he said, today, this has been fulfilled in your sight. And this was Jesus' way of saying, that's why I'm here. And that's what I'm going to be doing in my life. So the poor, what are you doing with your life? The brokenhearted, what are you doing with your life? Those that are captivated by their own sins, and what are you doing with your life? Those that are spiritually blind, what are you doing with your life? Jesus said, I have come, and this is what I'm going to do with my life. And we get up in our bold way and say, we need to think like Jesus. Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Baloney. Don't say it unless you mean it. Philippians 2 verse 5 tells us to do that, and it's in a context talking about being humble. And, Katrina, to be humble means to see yourself as the servant of everybody else deserving of your attention. That's humility. That was Jesus. And that's what we're to be about doing. But Dave, I've never known of a church that would organize its infrastructure in such a way to where their monies and their resources and their time and their attention was given to the poor, the brokenhearted, the captive, the blind, and the oppressed. I've never known of a church to do that. Never dividing the work of the church into the very areas Jesus said, that's what I'm going to spend my life doing. And yet we're to be the extension of Christ. Why is that? Why is that? Well, you can see we can just go on and on and on preaching about this. I came actually wanting to talk about 3 parables. We may not get out of one.
But Jesus called them on that. He said, you're like a whited sepulcher. You're all
Exactly.
holy and pretty on the outside. The inside, you're full of dead men's bones.
How many we have to say that to today?
I mean, he called all of us was called to that. I mean, not just them.
I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy. If your name is Nancy, I apologize. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to wake us up. It starts boom right down here now. I'm trying to wake myself up and alert us to the fact we are here to help people. I don't want to go to the day of judgment. And here Jesus said, I was and you did not. Because I know what he's going to say to folks like that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think of it like, we have to get out of our comfort zone because we have our little bubble of our people in here that, believe the same way we believe, but you have to get out of that comfort zone. And you also, like you said earlier, you have to get on their level. You can't look down on those people. You have to see them as they are. And everyone is God's child.
Look at life through their eyes.
Yeah.
I have a friend, a preacher friend, who had an accident years ago. Paraplegic. He's got the coolest wheelchair now. It comes all the way up. He's 6 feet tall. He looks me in the eye. He can get taller than I am. I love that for his benefit. But before he got that, when I would see him, he'd be eating lunch and so forth. And this is what I would see a lot of people do. How you doing? How you feeling? I'm so sorry to hear about this. And then we carry on a conversation like this. What's wrong with that? So what should we do? Somebody in a wheelchair.
Sit down on your lap.
Let's visit. When you're in a wheelchair, you reckon how many times the person lives today and people come along and look down on them and say hi, and in 1 minute or 2, they're gone because they don't have time to talk to them. Sit down. And immediately you're saying, I'm interested in nothing but I to sit down here and visit with you. What are you doing? You're reaching out to the marginalized. That's a marginalized person. And I'm not saying that to speak ill of anybody that's in a wheelchair. No. It's just the fate of life has placed them in a situation different than who we are. Well, let's recognize that and respond accordingly. What about a young man like we have at Spring Meadows that comes and worships, and when he comes in, he's coming with a white cane? You know what that tells us? Man can't see. He's blind.
None are so blind as they who will not see.
And so he will come in and he will not be using his white cane because he has his hand on the shoulder of his wife and she's leaving. And so when you visit, how do you visit with a man that can't look you in the eye because he doesn't know where your eyes are? But you come up and put your hand on his shoulder and let him know you're there, and then take your hand off your shoulder, and he knows that you're looking his direction because he can hear the direction of your voice, and now you're communicating with someone one-on-one. You have stepped into his world. On and on we could go. I know that people are struggling with life because of bad choices, but some people are struggling with life because of somebody else's bad choices. And even if they're struggling with life because of their own bad choices, does that mean they're taboo? Let's revisit who we are. Let's be a good Samaritan. Now do you know why he was called by so many the Good Samaritan? Because he did good, showing compassion. One more thought.
You know, this reminds me, we had a study Acts. And this all, to me anyways, this all fits into what the church is supposed to be.
Yes.
Because you can't study the book of Acts and understand what the church was supposed to be. And then these parables fit right into that. That it's not an organization of philosophical statements and literature and all. It's the very basics.
Correct.
That is, you know. And so the whole time you've been talking that, studying the book of Acts, just kept coming back to me that this is what, you know, and it's in an order, right? I mean, I'm a pretty systematic person, so things have to be in order for me. But we have this teaching of Christ that this is how we are supposed to look at people. Then he takes that and he says, now you put that in my church.
Yes. I'm telling you, folks, you can't be like Jesus as a church or as a Christian. Unless you reach out to the marginalized. You just can't do it. Now, on the day of judgment, mark it, there will be more people who do not like what they hear because of their deeds more than their doctrine. And that does not minimize doctrine at all. But more of us are going to be lost to a devil's hell because of what we did, or probably because of what we did not do, than because of our doctrinal insolvency. You can't be doctrinally insolvent. I'm just trying to bring up something point.
So Ramon and I were talking at the break and asking, we come across so many people in life, and we ask, like, who is my neighbor? Like, is it the person who lives right next to me? And I think what this is saying, if I'm making the application right, is you have to prove to be their neighbor.
Yes.
You have to prove to be there. So in a world that seems endless, 8 billion people, you know, so many options, like how, but you can prove to be a neighbor to someone else.
Sure can. And that is what makes you good. Now, that makes you good.
Brother Winkler,
There are the things that need to be done. One more thought here, and then we're gonna press on to another parable. Yes, sir.
I thought a couple of things. One is
You only get one. You only get one.
well, maybe I can make a 2 in 1.
There you go, man.
Or maybe I can reprieve since I'm in Atlanta. But one, I also think the lesson here is a person in need is your neighbor. And
That's the point.
and
Maybe to him.
Yeah.
Her.
yeah, I mean, whoever that person is. And remember, to the Jews, they had no dealings with the Samaritan. So, and it's interesting that my second point here. What exactly was the relationship of the Samaritan to the Jews? And we talked about the Jews to the Samaritans, and we get a glimpse of that in chapter 9. But do you know what the relationship of the Samaritan were to the Jews? That they have nothing to do with them, which is interesting that you have a Samaritan even come to Jerusalem anyway. But you have a Samaritan, wherever his attitude is about Jews, and he sees a half-dead Jew on the road, and he's willing to help him, even to the point of paying for his care. That is big. And it's a big lesson, not only to the Jews, it's a big lesson to us today.
To answer your question, the only thing I would know to do if you go to verses like John 3, where the Samaritan woman was curious as to why Jesus, a Jew, would speak to her, because the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritan. She was a Samaritan and she was a woman, and she was surprised that a Jew was even speaking to her. That gives you insight into how a Samaritan thought. And then, of course, you have, as you mentioned earlier here in Luke chapter 9, how the Samaritans rejected Jesus. And so it could be that the, for lack of better words, prejudice ran both ways. But it's interesting that Jesus would use the Samaritan here as the hero of the story. Let's shift gears now and go to Luke chapter 14. I'll tell you what. Let's hold off on Luke 14. We'll come back to that one tomorrow. Let's go to the familiar one to us, Luke 15, the parable of the prodigal son. We've got an hour left. And what we'll do here in this hour, if you need to get up, if you want to get up, get something to drink, you just make yourself more than at home and do so. We'll not take just a formal break. You need to get up and go to the restroom. I'll tell you what, for that purpose, why don't we go until about 8:15? We'll take about a 5-minute, 10-minute break there. We just want to try to get through this story. Let's look at the setting for the parable of the prodigal son. We are in Luke 15. For the setting, we go to the first 2 verses of the chapter. And in the first 2 verses of the chapter, we find 3 attitudes relative to sin. Okay? We're introduced to 3 groups or individuals in verses 1 and 2. Now, the tax collectors and sinners, group number 1, were all drawing near to hear him, individual number 2, Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes, group number 3, grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." First of all, in this passage, you have the sinful. You have the tax collectors and sinners. If you're reading the King James Version, it probably says publicans and sinners. Now, tax collector was someone that purchased from the Roman government the right to collect taxes. And the Roman government provided them with the license, so to speak, the responsibility to collect taxes, and they could collect as many taxes in many ways as they wished. If the government, the Roman Empire, said, for illustration purposes, to put it in our vernacular, if the Roman Empire said, now to cross this bridge, you must tax people $25. You had to get $25 because you were going to have to give that to the Roman Empire. But as a tax collector, you said, now to cross this bridge is going to cost you $75. But since you have 2 oxen instead of 1, it's going to cost you an extra $25. So it's actually going to cost you $100 to cross this bridge. And so they would take that $100, they would give 25 of it to the Roman Empire, and they'd pocket 75. It was legalized extortion. How did the other Jews feel about tax collectors? How do you feel about the IRS? They were a lot worse than the IRS. I read about one of them. He wasn't just a tax collector. He was a comptroller for the tax collectors, if you please. Luke chapter 19. Luke 19, verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, verse 2, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. Oh, and it says, and was rich. Duh. I wonder why. Well, he can come down here, and he's so grateful Jesus came to his house and so forth. Zacchaeus in verse 8 stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it. Literally, I hand away from me. We say hand over. I restore it fourfold. My word. He was wealthy. And he said, half of everything that I have, I'm going to give it away to the poor. And anything I have left, I'm going to use to help people that I've stolen from. That was a tax collector. They were thieves, tax collectors, and sinners. These weren't sinners because they didn't read their Bible on a daily basis. They weren't sinners because they didn't go to the synagogue for prayer. You go to Matthew chapter 21 and read verse 31, and you have tax collectors and prostitutes. That helps you understand what kind of sinners we're talking about. Individuals that would defile themselves to fulfill their own sensual pleasures or someone else's. These people came to Jesus. I want you to look at verse 1 and tell me, why did they come?
Hear.
To what?
Hear.
To hear what he had to say. Not to be healed, but to hear what he had to say. Hold up. How many thieves, how many women of the night are coming here because they want to hear what he has to say? And if they're not, why not? One of my favorite religious authors, Damien, is Philip Yancey. You ever read from Philip Yancey? You would really enjoy reading from him. One of his books is entitled, What is So Amazing About Grace? And at the beginning of one of the chapters, there's a woman who is a prostitute. And she's talking to a friend, and she's telling her friend that she wants to escape her lifestyle. She wants to leave prostitution. Her friend asked if she had gone to church, and she said in response, go to church? I already feel bad about what I do. Is that how sinners feel? when they come to church? Do we make them feel bad? Well, in a way, that can be good if you're talking about a broken and contrite heart, warning over sin in your life. But if you're talking about this condescending, we're better than you because look at the way you live your life. No. No. So you have the sinful that are coming to Jesus on this occasion. They're coming to him. What did Jesus do, by the way, when they came to him? They came to hear him. What did he do?
Well, he talked to him.
Spoke.
Healed him. Talked to him.
He made them feel like they mattered.
What does verse 2 tell you he did? He what? He received them. The word translated means welcome. He welcomed them. If this woman comes in and she's wearing a miniskirt that's what a miniskirt is, and she's painted up for the night, and she smells like business. She came to church on Sunday morning because she's thinking about leaving that lifestyle, and she wants to see what Christianity is all about. And she comes in and she sits down on the third row of the church building because she wants to make sure of the fact that she's there. What are you going to do? Did you see? Did you see? What are we going to do? You say we're going to welcome her? None? Are we? Are you going to go sit down by her and find out what her need is? Interact with her and let her know that she's loved? Are you going to do that? That's exactly what Jesus did. He said, I'm afraid of what people would say. He wasn't, and they said it. So you had the sinful. You came to hear him, and he gave them attention. You have the merciful. That's Jesus. And then you had the Pharisees and the lawyers, the Pharisees and the scribes. Go figure. What did they do?
He grumbled, complained.
Gungusma. It's not goose stepping. Gungusma. Again, it means nothing to you. I just like to say it. They grumble. Give me another word for grumble.
Right.
They complain. Give me another word for complain.
Grousing.
Ma'am?
Grousing.
Grouchy?
No, grousing.
Grousing. Okay, grousing. Give me another one. Keep going. Make it live.
They gripe.
What?
They gripe.
They gripe. Say one. What?
Judge.
The judge? Yes, they did. Bellyached. Complained.
Wine.
Whined. You know, on wine, do you know what the most famous whiskey in Tennessee is named? Huh? Jack Daniels? How'd you know that?
We receive sinners.
That is good. Oh, that's good. You know what? You know what the favorite, the most famous wine is in Tennessee? When are we ever going to beat the Georgia Bulldogs? I'm a Tennessee fan, so don't take that one against me. I just had to say it. Look, this you're a preacher, you go to school to learn bad jokes like that. You've got to tell them every now and then. With the Pharisees and the scribes, you have the critical. They grumbled because Jesus was receiving them. So you have these three groups of people in the setting of this story. Okay? So Jesus, because they're grumbling about his receiving the tax collectors and sinners, launches a series of stories. There are actually 3 stories. To get the significance of the story of the prodigal son, you have to watch the contextual flow of all 3 stories. And so, story number 1, lost what? Lost sheep. 1 out of 100. Story number 2, lost what? Coin. Piece of silver. Story number 3, lost what? Son.
Sons.
Thank you. Because we are going to see that was actually the case. Now, in each of these stories, Jesus is saying the same thing. But he is saying it from a different perspective. When it comes to the lost sheep, the one that was lost and found, the one of 99 over here, he said when there's one sinner that repents, there is joy in heaven, the home of God. When just one person that wasn't the way they should be becomes what they ought to be, just one. All of heaven rejoices. You can impact all of heaven. All you have to do is change your life for the better. That's the message of hope we need to be sharing with the world, right? The parable of the lost silver or lost coin. The coin would have been, it's believed, the 10 silver coins that would go in a headband or a headrest over a bride's forehead when she married. And so it would be like a wedding ring. So she lost one of the silver coins in her headband for her wedding. And she found it, and then it was great happiness. She brought all her friends over to rejoice. And Jesus said, just like that, when one sinner repents, there's joy among the angels of heaven. The host or army of God rejoices with just one person who wasn't the way they should be becomes what they ought to be. All the angels of heaven. How many are there? Bunch. That'd be a good answer. What's the Bible answer? It's not bunch. How many? More than 4 stars. More than all the stars. I think the word for that in the book of Hebrews is innumerable. What does that mean? You don't know how many there are. The Holy Spirit said, no reason to count. You're going to lose count. But the innumerable host of God rejoice with just one person. You can't number them all, but they're happy because you, as one person, decided to make proper changes in your life. Then you come to the parable of the son. And it says, let's see, you have the younger son, and you have the older son, and there's one more main character in the story. Who is he? Father. The father. Gotcha. And the father represents whom?
God.
Let's make merry, the father says. The parable of the prodigal son tells us there is happiness, there's joy in the heart of God himself, the Father, whenever we make the changes we need to make in life. So there's the setting, the sinful, the merciful, the critical. And in response to the critical, Jesus said, well, let me tell you 3 stories that can encourage you to rethink your criticism and get you to be thinking the way God does about sinners. And he tells these 3 stories. Now, this is the one to which we're giving our attention. The parable of the lost son's sons, the prodigal son. So if you would, let's take 5 minutes. If you need to get a restroom, we want to get a cup of coffee or a Coke, and we'll come right back here. Let's just say we'll be right here at 8:30, and we'll dive in for the scenes of the prodigal son. There are 3, and then we'll call our evening to I'm going to read the story just like we did with the parable of the Good Samaritan. I want to read the story, and as I read the story, if you'd like to mark in your Bibles, that's a big idea. But if you'd like to mark in your Bibles, I'm going to ask you to circle a specific word as it occurs repeatedly. Then we'll go back and count how many times we find that word. Okay? So now here's the third of 3 stories that Jesus is telling the critical Pharisees and scribes. And he said, verse 11, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his circlet father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the son gathered all that he had and took journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. Some translations say riotous living. We don't know what that reckless living involved, what that riotous living entailed. Jesus is simply telling a story. We don't need to fill in the blanks and make this guy somebody that he wasn't. He was just living his life and using his money in ways that he shouldn't. I know later on, the older brother said that he squandered his living with prostitutes, but we don't know that. That's just something that is a part of a fabric of the story to make the story breathe. So he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. What would that have meant to a Jew, to feed pigs?
Pigs were considered
Not
unclean.
good. Why? They were unclean. So he went to take care of that which is unclean. Isn't it interesting that a boy wasted his money in reckless or riotous living, making himself possibly unclean, and now he ends up taking care of animals that are unclean? Interesting the way Jesus kind of wove all these things together. As he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, no one gave him anything. I mean, the man he's taking care of unclean animals, and he wants to eat what the unclean animals ate. I've never had to slop hogs, but I've seen them slopped. I don't want that for supper. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my circlet father's hired servants have more than enough to bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will rise and I will go to my circlet father, and I will say to him, circlet father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his circlet father. And while he was still a far way off, his circlet father, Katrina, saw him and felt compassion I mean, almost the same identical phrase that you find in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Saw him and felt compassion, ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, circlet, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the circlet father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, bring the fatted calf, kill it, let us eat and celebrate, make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. And they began to make merry, to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. He said to him, your brother has come, and your circlet father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His circlet father came out and entreated him. But he answered his circlet father, look, these many years I've served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate, make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, not my brother. See the way Jesus worded that? When this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and was alive, he was lost. Let's count our circles. How many times do we read the word Father? Let me count here. You count, I count, we'll compare. From this one, I counted 12. Y'all counted 12? That's a good Bible number, isn't it? So tell me, who is this story about? Beg pardon?
Father.
It's about the Father. Why do we call it the prodigal son? The parable of the prodigal son. Why? It's not about him. It's about the Father. Now let's look at each scene and sum it up in a word or two. Scene number 1. The consumer. That, of course, would be the young son. The young son came to his father and said in verse 12, as Jesus tells the story, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. I want my inheritance. If I went to my daddy and I treated my daddy like he was already dead, and I said to him, Daddy, I want what's coming to me. I guarantee you I'd get it. It's not what I had in mind. But that's what this boy did. He treated his daddy like he was already dead. And so, as Jesus tells the story, the father divided his property between them. Who's the them?
Two sons.
The two sons. The older son, the younger son. Now, in Old Testament times, in keeping with the sentiment of Deuteronomy 21, verse 17, the oldest son received a double portion of the inheritance. As the older son of my family, I like that. I sure enough like for that to just keep on going. But I had two brothers and they wouldn't have liked that at all. And when we received our inheritance, the way Mother and Daddy did it, each of us received an equal third. But that's not the way they did it in the Old Testament times. So here are two boys. That means the older boy received 2/3 of his daddy's property, and the younger boy received 1/3 of his daddy's property. Don't miss the fact that the way Jesus told the story, the daddy divided his inheritance, his property, among them. The younger boy got his third, and the older boy got his 2/3 right there. And that's why the daddy could say on down later on, verse 31, son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was his because the daddy had already given it to him. He did that when he gave his brother 1/3. So that's what's going on here. The boy, I want what's mine. Give it to me. And he got it. Then he goes into a far country and squandered it. He lost everything. Write it down. He lost his money. He lost his security. But nobody around. Nobody to help him. He lost his friends. He's in a pigsty. He lost his dignity. He lost everything. He was a consumer. Let's pause for a moment. What do you do with what you have? How many of us are blessed? Not one of us can't raise our hand. We are blessed. Don't raise your hand. How many of us use our blessings to be a blessing to others? Or in converse, how many of us are consumers? All you have to do is look at your checkbook, study your budget. Is your mortgage the largest thing in your budget? Compare what you give to the Lord on Sunday to your truck payment, your car payment, your boat payment. Compare what you give to help other people who have less to the amount of money you spend on your wardrobe and all those suits and dresses and ties and coats that you wear 3 times a year. How many of us are consumers? The only thing I can say to that is spelled in all caps. Ouch. The Lord has a way of spanking it, doesn't he? Really? I hope you're taking this and you're saying, instead of, I don't know about that, or instead of, I don't care for that, I hope you're saying, I want to take that and see if I can't do better. Let's see if we can't do better. There's the consumer.
We don't like to think about it, but whom God loves, he chastens.
Yes, that's right. I'm being chastened when I read these stories, don't you? Being disciplined. So the first scene is the scene called consumer. Scene number 2. It constitutes the bulk of the story because that's what the story is about. Scene number 2 we will call the compassionate. And of course that would be the Father himself, who represents God the Father. Now as we read, it says that the boy came to himself. What does that mean?
Came to his senses.
Ma'am?
Came to his senses.
Came to his senses, good. And said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? When he found himself at the bottom, the first one that he thought about was his father. Sidebar. I wonder if I was that kind of a father. My sons ever reach a moment where they really are in need, would I be the first that they would think I'd call it? I need to think about that. Hey, I need to pass that on to our sons that have just become daddies. That's the kind of father we need to be. So the first one that came to his mind was his father in my father's house. He said, but here I perish. He said, I'm going to rise and go to my father. I'm going home. When there was nothing else he could do and there was nowhere else he could go, he knew he could go somewhere. Where did he know he could go? He knew he could go to his father. Does my son know that? Does my daughter know that? Do they know that? The boy said, he put the spiel together. He worked on speech. He said, I'm going to tell my daddy this. He said, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. That's the speech that he prepared to give his dad. Okay? So now he heads home. Verse 20 says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. And the word saw there is that same word that was used for the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan. He saw with an element of recognition his son. We can only surmise what it was about the boy that he recognized. Was it the way that he walked? The way that he carried himself? I had 3 sons. I lost one of them. 16 years ago. I don't know what it was. There's always an empty chair at Thanksgiving meeting. Figuratively speaking. There's always a voice that is silent. I can still remember the sound of his voice. But I have forgotten what it sounded like to hear him laugh. That bothers me. I had 2 sons. My older 2 sons, side by side, look a lot. But I never, ever mistook one for the other. You ever notice how when you're a younger parent and your children are outside playing and someone begins to scream, you can recognize whether that's your child or not? Something about a father, mother, recognizing their child. That's what we have here. The father saw with recognition his son while he was still a long way off, implying to me, here was the daddy looking on the horizon. Could this be good? he saw him and felt compassion. The boy hadn't come by yet. They're not close yet. He's still a long way up. But what he sees not only allows him to recognize his boy, but what he sees fills him with compassion. This is again a passive tense verb, meaning this is something that was done to the daddy. The daddy didn't see his boy and say, let me think. I believe I will be compassionate today. No. He saw this boy with an element of recognition, and he was literally overtaken by what he saw in his son a long way on. And he had this compassion. I've got to do something. That's my boy. The compassion. And so, first of all, what's the first thing that he did?
Servants.
He ran. He didn't walk. He didn't wait for the boy to come to him. What's the second thing that he did? It didn't say that the boy embraced him. It says he embraced the boy. What's the third thing that he did? Kissed me. And the original terminology paints the word picture of literally kissing down. You remember a long time ago, that commercial, I'd like to teach the world to sing in harmony. And you had a man, and you had a woman, and they were in a wheat field with the wheat blowing just in the wind, and he starts running to her, and it's in slow motion, and she's running to him, and what happens? They always cut it off right before they go. But that's the idea here. He ran and embraced and kissed him down. It's like they're running to each other, and the centrifugal force of them both means they literally fell down on the ground as they're embracing each other, and the daddy's kissing them. The next thing that the daddy did is implied. Just read it. You see it happen. The son said to him, now, let's do something. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to read the speech that the boy had prepared. Go back, if you would, to verse 18. I will say to him, I'll say to my dad, Father, I want you to read it, starting with the word Father there, all the way to the end of the verse. Read the speech that he wanted to give to his daddy. And he started the speech. As you read it, we're going to listen, okay? Start what he's going to say to his father.
Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as
But whoa. But the father said, you see what happened? Come on. The moment Daddy heard the words, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But Daddy heard all he was going to listen to. I'm no longer worthy. And the father said, stop right there. Bring quickly. That adverb's pretty important. The best robe. Put it on. Not a robe, but the best one we've got. No longer worthy, he gets the best. Put a ring on his hand. That's the signet ring of the family. Put shoes on his feet. Slaves went barefooted in Old Testament time, in New Testament times. Servants, they went barefooted. Family had shoes. Put shoes on that boy. I want him to know he's still my son. He's still family. He's not servant. Bring the fatted calf out, kill it, let's celebrate. So he interrupted the boy. Wouldn't let the boy think he's not worthy. He made the boy think, I'm still worth something to my daddy. and they celebrated his return with compassion. How do I feel when someone lost to the devil finally decides to make his or her life right with God and comes home? How do I treat that person? Do I treat them as if they have a pass? Because with forgiveness, you have a pass. Forgiveness is the peace of living without a past. The sins will I forgive. I will remember the iniquities will I forgive, and the sins will I remember no more. The compassion. I know the family. I know the circumstances. Put it that way. There was an individual that made some poor decisions. You heard a lot of people. She heard a lot of people. What they decided to do, heard a lot of people. I don't know if she knows the man. I don't know if she knows the man. Because you don't want to speak in a generic, but I'm not. That individual felt horrible about the deal. And they wanted to make it right. And that's what he did. Those that did wrong questioned his sincerity, her sincerity, their sincerity. We don't know if that person really means it. That person's probably going to do it again, blah, blah, blah. We don't know. They questioned their sincerity. Forgiveness. Hard to come by the kingdom of God. And he, she, they, that person fell prey to the devil where he is today. Because he, she, they didn't see compassion in part of those. That's not the heart of Jesus. Wake up and show people the heart of Jesus. Show them. Why do I have to question someone's sincerity when they ask for forgiveness? Luke chapter 17 says, if it happens to me 7 times in a day, 7 times in a day, I must. That's what Jesus did for you. We must show the compassion of the Father, is what I'm saying. And I've used that to illustrate the fact we have a hard time doing that. We do. Well, what if it happens to you? Depends on how egregious the offense is. If it really, 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 really hurts you bad, you're still obliged to show compassion. I remember somebody saying, Father, forgive them.
But that's not what they did.
Sin number 3, the critical. Who would that be in the story?
Older son.
Older buddy, older brother, older son. He was in the fields. He came, drew near, heard the music, and heard the dancing. What's going on? Well, your brother's come. Who? Your father's killed a fatted calf. He's what? I know those words when it's Bible, but that's what's going on. He was angry. The two main words, three words really for anger. The two mainest, as they say, words. One is thumos, and it means to lose your temper. Fly off the handle. And the other is orgos, or orge, verb orgizo. And it means this to have a long, simmering, avenging anger. And it's the second one that Jesus used in telling the story. This older brother had this long, simmering, avenging anger. His brother left, treated his daddy like a dead man, took a third of the inheritance with him, and the boy had been steaming about it ever since, the way the story's told. He refused to go anywhere there was a party. His father came out and entreated him. Boy answered, look, these many years I've served you, and I've never disobeyed you. The younger boy said, Daddy, I'm no longer worthy. The older brother said, Daddy, I'm very worthy. The younger brother said, I'm no longer worthy to be treated this way. And the older brother said, I'm really worthy, but you never treated me this way. They're two peas in a pod. They're both selfish. They're both mistreating their daddy. And they're both wrong. The younger boy was still worthy. The older brother, he was never as worthy as he thought.
He was
But
self-righteous.
Ma'am?
He was
He
self-righteous.
took the words out of my mouth. Exactly. Usually people that are thinking themselves to be worthy are the ones that are critical and self-righteous. Exactly. And so he's the critic. I wonder how quick am I to be critical of those who show compassion to people I don't like because of the way they behave? Why is he treating him, her that way? Don't they know who they are, what they did? Don't they know what they did to me? Why are they reaching out to them? They ought to be pushing them away. That's what I want. How many of us are like the older brother? Come on. You see, in reality, Jesus told this story. And here's what you see. The younger brother, the consumer, can be seen in the tax collectors and sinners who live their lives the way they wanted to live their lives. The tax collectors stole from their fellow Jews because they wanted whatever they could get. The prostitutes lived their lives for their passion, the passion of others. They were consumers, living life for self. The older brother is representative of the Pharisees and the scribes who were critical of Jesus for embracing the tax collectors and sinners, receiving them, welcoming them. The heart of the Father can be seen in the heart of Jesus, who was receiving those who came to hear what he had to say to give them hope and sins. So in reality, you and I find ourselves in one of three camps. I'm either a younger brother, an older brother, or a compassionate father. I'm either like the tax collectors and sinners and I'm living my life the way I want to live my life. Hey, it's my life. Or I'm like the Pharisees and the scribes who criticize anybody and everybody for not being or doing what I want them to be or do. And I'm uber conservative and say, you're not right with God because you're not right with me doing it right the way I think it ought to be done. There are people like that all over the place. Or I'm like, Father, surely people the heart of Jesus. Which are you? The heart of Jesus as seen, I'll get you in a minute. The heart of Jesus as seen in this story will turn this place. Why were the tax collectors and sinners coming to Jesus? Why were they? Come again. To hear him. What was he telling people? What? What was he saying to folks? What was his message? Just good news message. You can sum it up in one 4-letter word that starts with H. It's not H-E-L-L. I got it. I had to put it out there because mine would go. Yeah. What was it?
Hello.
That was his message. You had tax collectors and sinners coming to Jesus because he was giving people like them. He faced opposition doing it. So will we. People in the world that will ask, what in the world are they thinking? You'll have other congregations of the church thinking, who do they think they are? When you fail to, you know what a goose step is? The Hitler goose step, you know, boom, I can't do it. Rip my hamstring. But it's pushing up and walking like this, goose step. And you watch them in a line, and they're all goose step. That's the Hitler goose step. You're going to have people that are going to criticize you hand over fist because you don't goose step their way. So I got a gesture for you. That's what you say. No, that's not what you say. That's what you want to say. I'm sorry, I got that out. That's what you want to say. What do you say? Why are you doing that? What you say is, thank you for trying to help me. I have a question for you. Why are you not that? Why are you not showing people of Jesus? We've seen 2 stories tonight, and both of them are really challenging. Really. They're very familiar to us, but oh, how challenging. One of them says, revisit your priorities and take your blessings to be a lesson. And the other one says, you be someone that shows so much compassion for their desire to do better, they can't help but come to you for hope. These stories can just thank me. So tomorrow, let's see, we'll start with the parable of the unfinished tower and prudent king. And then we will go. Well, there was a question about the rich man and Lazarus. I understand that. So for that sake, in reference to that, we'll move beyond that and go to the persistent widow, to the Pharisee and publican praying in the temple, and then to a trinity of stories for our last hour together. Okay? That's
I mentioned real quick the end.
Yes.
So tomorrow lunch will be from 12 to 1, and anyone present is welcome, or asked welcome to bring your potluck meal to 90 with the entree. So,
Great.
this line watches.
Last night and tonight. Thank everybody who's responsible for bringing that good food for us. Let's pause for a word of prayer and use. Father in heaven, thank you for our Savior. What a wonderful man. More than a man we know. What a great teacher. He said so much in such an economy of words. He challenges us hand over fist. We know we need to do better. We're thankful that these stories encourage us to do so. Equally, Father, we're grateful that you're patient enough and that you're slow to anger. We recognize that. We're not going to take advantage of that, take you for granted in any way. We just are thankful that you're patient with us in our struggles. We pray, Father, in your providential care, that you help us do better. Be better. The individual Christians, the church of Christians that live our lives in ways that draw people to us, because more than anywhere else in this world, they see Jesus in us. It's in his name that we pray. Okay, see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Do we have, are you going to have donuts tomorrow morning? Okay, I just needed, I wanted to try what not to eat.
Don't eat donuts.